Welcome to today's episode for people interested in the extraordinary, yet ancient and often long forgotten stuff. This is your host, Joseph Schinwald from ownbythebeach.com. Our guest today is Alison J.K. Hello, Alison.
Hi, I'm just wolfing down some supplements. How are you?
Okay. No supplements today. The topic today is, what if there is nothing wrong? And that is actually also the title of one of her books. So a little bit about bio. Alison J.K., PhD, is the creator and founder of the vibrational upgrade system, holistic and spiritual advisor, mastermind, body and soul healer. Alison is a mastermind body energy medicine practitioner for more than 20 years and a world traveler who lived and worked at an international school in Asia for 10 years, while also performing energy healings on clients worldwide. During her experience in Asia, Alison completed her PhD as a holistic life coach. She continued fiercely studying Buddhism and Buddhist meditation, while also learning, eventually teaching Qigong and receiving traditional Chinese and other Asian holistic treatments many times per week. Prior to returning home, Dr. Alison went to India and became a Yoga Alliance certified yoga and meditation teacher. So, Alison, how do you define? We will talk today about energy and the Tao, emptiness, God, and all this, because you have been studying Buddhism and Taoism, and so that will be a fantastic question. But the first one would be, how do you actually define energy flow? And why is it important to understand?
That's a great question. The latter part in particular, because it's my mission, Joseph, that I came back from Asia with. When I moved there, part of the reason why I moved there, 90% of the reason why I was in there, as opposed to any other of the locations around the world that I was offered a job teaching at an international school, that was because of the understanding they have of energy there in Asia, and that they still operate from it. So I went there after having my hands over a client's womb area during an energy medicine and holistic health and wellness session while I was still in the States, teaching in the local public school system and running these sessions on the side. And I was already getting really good results for my clients, and she was pleased. It wasn't like there was lack, but I wanted even quicker, more robust results. I wanted more from the ego. Not really though, because I asked intuitively. I looked up in this session and I asked, how can I get even more robust results for my clients? And so that coalesced with me wanting more adventure. And at that point, I had a master's, and as a teacher in the public school system, I wasn't having an easy time making basic needs, getting them met, a basic housing, basic car. I did want organic produce. I have been a vegetarian for 31 more year, and it'll be 30 years. And massage per week, because I consider that preventative health, like 201. But it wasn't extravagance or luxury, really. And it was too tight. It was too much like a cage, too. So I wanted to go and have more adventure. And so I asked basically, what would that look like for me? And I got a colleague who told me about the international school system within a month. So I went over. I chose to go to Asia from all the different offerings I had from different continents, because they understand energy and they're still operating from it. Whereas in the West, we had our alchemists who went underground once the church came in, the formal church came in. So there 10 years, you mentioned some of the things that I did there. And so when I returned to the States, I left my full-time, at that point I had become an administrator as well, in teacher career, and took my energy medicine and holistic health and wellness practice full time into this business that I've now been doing for almost 12 years full time. And the number one aspect of my mission is, man, and this is what I realized increasingly in the decade living over there, if people in the West only knew about consciousness and how it works and the science of subtle energy, there would be so much less suffering and much more thriving. And that's been my mission. So energy flow, there's a science behind it. And it's a lot of information to download in a couple of minutes, but there's these centers, as many of you probably know, the word chakra means in Sanskrit, wheel, and they're meant to turn. And we have 7 major ones all along what you consider a central column, basically where the spine is. And they go both front and back. They're meant to be circulating chi or prana, or ki as in Reiki, or chi as in Qigong, which I also teach, or prana, which is what we call it in the yogic community, which translates into English, vital life force energy. And so with this vital life force energy flowing throughout our system, through all the distribution networks our system has between the 7 main chakras, which you could think of as urban hubs or city centers, and then all the interstates and the roads and the highways and motorways and side roads and country roads that lead to these major city hubs. That's what energy flows along. That's what it looks like in our system. But our consciousness, not the thoughts you hear, but our consciousness, the full meaning of that, we can get into that in a bit, is what makes the energy flow through our system or not. And then when a chakra has had enough purification, the ego mind, the levels of blocked consciousness has had enough clearing, then the chakras are able to not only spin like the wheel they're intended to and churn that vital life force energy as the central hub for the mind, the body, and the spirit about a particular aspect of life, so that all major domains of life are covered, like money, sex, love, giving, receiving, connection to God. Each chakra as a hub where the mind, the body, and the spirit intersect, covering a certain aspect of life. I found it incredibly, not unbelievably, but because it's created by the divine, just completely reliable for the way in to help a person evolve. And so as the chakras clear out the old, the karma, the imprints, the contracts, the conditioning, traumas, and a lot more than what I just listed, the chakras turn and they create, with proverbial lotus petals, as it's referred to in the yogic culture, a vortex. And that vortex emanates out energy in front of each of the chakras that then creates your auric field. And that field, where I love spending my time, in my 3rd book, I go into this a lot, Reasonable Dragons, how to activate the field of unlimited possibilities, where logical magic is the new norm. So I call the Tao the field of, when I say the Tao, I mean the field that when we refer to the Tao for the use of the field, I refer to that as a field of unlimited possibilities, so that when our consciousness is purified, and therefore elevated or upgraded and lighter and cleaner, and all the chakras are humming for the most part, the vortices are emanating out front and back from the chakras. That creates a really robust field that much more easily connects in with the field of unlimited possibilities, or the Tao. And then real thriving begins and fun.
Yeah, that was a fantastic explanation. And yes, it's important to understand these energy centers, because we usually are stuck somewhere, right? Because, we all have our experiences, good and bad. And, knowing that our egoic mind, everybody has one basically, but it's not us. It's kind of, imagination, but it's a map of who we are. But when we identify with it, then we become very atomic, so to speak, and we can easily get stuck in certain energy centers. And you explained it very nicely. It's about the whole chakra, the one which is harmonizing all of them, which is us, and that one goes out then to this what they call. It doesn't matter what you call it really, because there is no name. There is no name for it. It's a no name thing. No name for it, because you can call it energy. You can call it the Tao. You can call it emptiness, the void, nothingness. You can call it God, really. It is a human word. We try to describe it, but it's good that we think about infinite potentiality in that sense, that it's the unmanifest, right? And we are connected with it. For me, that's the main thing, that we have a relationship with it. We are not like, we are kind of surrounded by the void, and we can perceive it as complete nothingness. We can perceive it as God. We can perceive it as Tao, in other words, ultimately, it's a mystery, and that's where we come from, and that's where we are going again. So it's like, well, we say no thing, right? Nothing, no thing. It's a no thing.
But I find it, I love what you just said, because I do that all the time too. When I'm saying, like, when you connect with your intuition, or your higher self, or your guidance, or your team, or however you frame it, however it works for your system to label this phenomena. But with the Tao, or the void, as you say, the void or nothing, I find it, because I have a signature program that is really fun. It's called Magic, Manifestation, and Money Flow. And people have breakthroughs of their lives in there. One woman who's been on the spiritual path for decades has said it's like spiritual finishing school. It's called Magic, Manifestation, and Money Flow. So I'm teaching the mechanics. I'm going through opening up a person's system in the way I just described, with clearings and activations and in coaching and intuitive, always intuitive coaching. It's not, I don't like to give advice. You can get that from your family. Why would you pay a professional, So I always hook into my intuition to see what's in the individual's highest and best for their unique being. But what I'm getting at is this mechanics to manifestation. And I find that I'm teaching all the time and helping people with what I just described. So I feel like there is a certain term usage, because if somebody visualizes nothingness all around them, then it's harder for them to activate that field and feel like they have empowerment. You said something beautiful right before we started recording. I loved what you said, how the East teaches that we are each responsible for our own liberation. And that's a key part of life on planet Earth right now, as the West kind of integrates that idea. And so in that empowerment, that we are each responsible for our liberation, in that empowerment, we are creating our lives. And so I could go into more, I won't yet, but I just wanted to distinguish that. I feel like if a person understands that there is invisible life force all around them, that the higher their vibration is, the more they can move it in the direction that their heart desires, not in an egoic desire. I mean, we can manifest red sports cars if that's going to light up our heart and more joy on the planet. But it has to be in a certain sense of an alignment with what our heart and higher self wants for us on our path in order to more easily manifest. So like there's these mechanics that I find using certain terms helps people understand that they are what's showing up in their life. While some of it is random and karmic, most of it is being created by consciousness that we're not even able to hear. So I just wanted to clarify, like there is stuff. When you say nothing, what do you mean?
Well, I mean no thing. I mean also that this is a word which has to be often defined, because you can compare it with nihilism, and that's not what the Buddhists mean. Or in China, there's everything is like wu wei, whatever. It's a lot of nothingness there, right? So that's a different sense. I mean, it's like there is nothing and there is something. Obviously, it goes together. It's a duality, and you don't have something without nothing.
Excuse me. I don't think that's obvious to a lot of Western minds. Like, I talk like you do, right? And I have found through the years, teaching in depth this process I'm talking about and much more, that the assumption that when I say nothing, that also implies everything, it's not there. Like, you and I know that when we're saying it, but the average Western mind doesn't. So I've like gone with implications, just assuming people would understand that inference.
They say God created everything ex nihilo, out of nothing. They have it actually in the scripture. But, the thing is really that we cannot really understand Eastern philosophies, which are really rich. There's a lot of wisdom in there, right? And we can use it as a Christian, as a Jew, as a Muslim. Obviously, we can use it, and we do all kinds of things like meditation, and it's all Eastern. But, I would say that if you go into this distinction between the East and West, and I appreciate really both, but if you go in there, then we see something which is called original sin. And I studied divinity. So I studied a lot of this stuff when I was young, and, masters in divinity. So, it's all about that. All our theology, everything in our culture actually starts from there. It's like out of nowhere, this story comes, this Garden of Eden story, suddenly, and like D.T. Suzuki, when he first gave his speech, a Zen master from Japan, when he gave his speech in America, first he said, funny culture, he said, God hates man, man hates God, man hates woman, woman hates man, man hate nature. Well, these divisions don't exist in the East. And it's funny that this kind of story made it actually into scripture. Like first in the Babylonian thing, and then Talmud, Old Testament, and it's also in Quran, and it's in the Christianity. Well, there is some symbolic to it. I mean, probably Joseph Campbell could tell us something very, very positive about it. But what I saw, studying theology and all this, it is like what people theology is about. How should we feel? Can we feel, coming back to our topic, there's nothing wrong with us, or there's nothing wrong? Or do we have to feel that we are stained by something from the past, and therefore we need forgiveness, we need all this, and we have to have the Savior? And that disempowers people, a little bit. It can empower them as well. I mean, it depends, somebody has a very strong faith in God. That's very admirable, and they are very powerful. However, a lot of people, they probably feel a little bit, like I did. When you think about it, you can't really, you're dependent on somebody else. And I don't like that. Because in the East, then, they have this, that you can take responsibility for yourself, and you can actually, still a chance, work on your growth, but not the growth in wealth and all this is beautiful also. But I think first of all, or simultaneously, we should also think about the growth within us, the spiritual growth, whether it's a growth or not, because, people have different models of reality. But the question is really, who are we? That's the first thing. Because when we try to answer this question, again, we talk about the nameless. But it's like referring ultimate reality to ourselves. That's what it is. Not looking something outside of ourselves. But this is a big question first, in order to understand the blessings we have with abundance and health, because, these are objective things to our consciousness. And while we live here, we love to experience it because we have the senses, the body. We have it. We can do it. We can experience it. Yet there is this other unmanifest. The Buddhists, as you know, they talk about suchness, and, well, there is obviously, you don't look at it with your eyes. It's like invisible. It's formless. It's you also, and it's, well, you could say nobody can prove it scientifically. I sense it for myself, and that's good enough. I feel it. And in meditation, I know there is more than just the visible manifestation of it. Even though this is very wonderful, this is all magic. We're talking about magic, and all this. It's Maya, as you know, in the East. It's the real illusion, but that's all good. There's nothing wrong with it. I like this now. There's nothing wrong.
What if there's nothing wrong? It's a term that I actually use with my clients, my long-term students who become vibrational upgrade practitioners, which is the system I developed. And they use that to talk back to their self-talk when the ego mind's problem focused, as our societies are, especially after this last couple of years on planet Earth, so problem focused. And there's value that's given to a person who is successful at problem solving. All of our marketing comes from, here's the problem and here's my product or service that's the solution. So we have this construct, and this is one of my majors in college, actually, after I left psychology, realizing they weren't focusing on answering how do we be the happiest, most thriving versions of ourselves. So but I understand now as I was understanding how we end up being the way we are and believing the way we are. And so marketing, the whole premise behind it is there's a problem and here's a solution. So we end up with this construct of valuing being a problem solver, and jobs like what is this title? Project manager. That's a common title in corporate America. And so what if there's nothing wrong is a great way to hook in the invisible, the mystical, the mysterious. I love that you talked about the mystery, because there's a tribe I think it's the Lakota Sioux, a Native American tribe that calls God Great Spirit and Great Mystery. And so by asking a question where the mind loves to conclude, the ego mind, as we refer to it in the meditative practices of the East, because the personality is attached to that level of the mind, and it's just the most base level, really. The ego mind concludes that there's something wrong, and it focuses from the conditioning and the entrainment to the greater cultural backdrop. And when we talk back to it using a technique in Tibetan Buddhism, as well as Western cognitive behavioral psychology, talking back to the mind, well, what if there's nothing wrong when it has a conclusion, oh, this sucks, so that the question opens up and invites in other possibilities instead of like being in that conclusion state where the mind makes all its conclusions, because that's what it does. It labels, it evaluates, it judges, so that we can navigate life on the physical plane.
Yeah, I mean, Alison, this is what you just said is beautiful the way you said it, because you say, this is beautiful. This is actually how it is. There's nothing wrong with having a representation about who you are, which is the ego. And, and we work like this in society, and we are problem solvers. That's great. That brought us where we are. A lot of evolution is built on that, right? But ultimately, what is wrong? Maybe just that we are believing that is us. Wrong is maybe with the egoic mind, that we believe that this representation, the map, is the real territory. That is actually us, particularly since it's formed also a lot by society, by others. And we identify with it. But we can really identify with anything. I don't know why we have this kind of ability, but we can identify with a diamond ring. We can identify with a private jet. We can identify with a bigger house than the Joneses next to us. We can identify with the job titles we have, and ultimately we are not happy with it, because obviously the ego mind knows, because it's also us, right? It's us, that there's something wrong with this kind of thinking going on, because it's based on the premise that the thought, the label we give ourselves when we think about us, that this is actually real. But it is real in a sense, but it's not the whole story. It's just a map.
Well said.
It's not the territory.
It's not the whole.
And who we are, who we really are,
yeah.
who we really are, we can't even find a name in all the books in the world.
Yeah.
Just when you say God and all this, and emptiness, it's great. We have words to talk about. But ultimately, these are all pointers because it's outside the semantics. It's outside the thinking mind. It's consciousness, as you said. And in consciousness, all these things happen to us, all these objective things, thoughts. But, we can identify with consciousness, with awareness, because that's who we are, independently of the world, independently of the body. It's kind of timelessness, right? But anyway, it's not about me here. So, I should wait a little bit until you want to respond with something. Then I have another question.
Well, I feel like, so I love what we're doing right now. And because part of not part of my PhD program was studying divinity too. And, I hold a ministerial license, but I don't ever refer to that. So the theology.
Well, me either. I'm not going in there.
Yeah.
Like I was never a priest or something.
Yes.
In fact, I studied afterwards international business, but just like you, somehow, I think we have it inside of us. We were drawn to it, to learn it.
I was connected to it from birth. I used to tromp in the woods. I'm looking at a cypress swamp right now here on the west coast of Florida. I'm sitting out with my lanai and the sun's shining and it's beautiful and our earth is beautiful. And I've been tromping on it just when I was growing up as a girl with my older brother who would go in front of me in the forest right next to our house and break the already dead tree limbs and jump on them like boys do. And I'd be just connecting with everything all around me, feeling like there was no concept, I am connecting with everything all around. I just was. And then in my teens, I started to write in a journal. Nobody suggested it. And I just wanted to start doing it. I now have a trunk full of these journals in other places too, because one trunk doesn't hold them all. But I was connecting. What I learned later was that I was learning how to allow that connection to remain and connect with my own intuition, my higher self. And so I've always had this sense of connection in me, as you said, like we were drawn to it. And I love that you said too, that it's not the whole story. Because when I was sitting there as a psychology major, I was like, this isn't, as I already said, this isn't showing me how to be the most thriving, happiest version of myself and then help others. You're focused on, becoming a hard science, improving yourself and the hardwiring of the brain and using it for human resources and industrial management for capitalistic purposes. So I switched. And so I've been connecting in with the mystical always. And yet I find that there have been so many conversations I've had in my 20s, especially, and in my 30s about so much of what we're talking about. But I find in my business, I find that it is my mission that I have said yes to help bring it into a practical application, because it's almost like the divine is using a backdoor approach to helping people open up to getting the whole picture in a way that is almost like a trick. So somebody could come in saying, I'm going on to my fourth marriage, or I'm wanting to start my own business rather than be in this corporation, or like something material. And we work on that and they get fantastic results. But what I'm doing is everything I said at the beginning. So they're opening up, they're learning how to connect with their higher self. They're learning that there's something beyond their thinking mind and their thoughts that they hear. They're learning how to work with the flows of energy if they go on to work with me and study at the mastermind level. But what I'm saying is there is something going on our planet right now. I had my own radio show for 2.5 years, and I was interviewing specialists who had developed ways to measure, that I wrote about in my first book, What If There's Nothing Wrong? Energy, and ways to measure consciousness. But I also had on there specialist about December 21st, 2012. And so we're in this 20-year window of what's considered humanity's greatest evolutionary leap. And one of the things that I find myself saying over and over and over and over again is that this time is about understanding that the power that we each have via our choices, and that we are, in fact, creating our lives every day by the choices, more so we're not making than the choices we're making, because there's only 15. So science and stats have said that it's about 85% of our daily life choices are made from the subconscious and unconscious. So at best, it's 15% of the thoughts we actually can hear that we're creating our lives from, that we're opening that email, that we're saying yes to that opportunity, that we're seeing that opportunity, that we're not seeing that other person over there at the party, maybe a new person who could come into our lives. So what we see and what we don't see, and what we choose and what we don't choose, and who we interact with and what opens up in our lives and stays dormant in our lives, is based on how much consciousness we have freed up to be making more aligned choices day in and day out. So I find, after decades of doing this work, that the average person is living, even people who've done spiritual work and they would say they've been on the path for decades, that it's around a little bit less for them. But the average person, it's like up to 95% typically of their daily choices are made out of that habitual space. So when we're learning to drive, we say, put car in reverse, put car in drive, put foot on brake, put foot on gas. And we don't do it anymore once we've learned. And that's like what I'm talking about, where the choices are so robotic. So what I'm doing is clearing the unconscious and subconscious. So un is not conscious, sub is under conscious mind, in a more robust, quicker way than, like, I can look at one of my masterminders, and in 2 years, I remember this happened like 2 years ago. I said to her, oh my God, you're getting results that took me 5 years of meditation to get, because I'm coupling in the vibrational upgrade system I developed applied mindfulness after I run the energy medicine clearings and activations, so that once the consciousness is freed up out of the buried state, the un or subconscious level, and then freed up to be accessed at a conscious mind level, people have to develop new neurological pathways that allow for new choices and new behaviors to then ensue. So when I do a clearing on somebody who believes that, they were programmed, I have to fight for what I want, or I have to fight to be heard. Maybe they grew up in a family with a bunch of siblings and busy parents. And so they have a business and they're a speaker, and they keep investing in programs with people about how do they get heard and what system gets them seen more. And they spend tens of thousands of dollars doing this, when in fact it's an internal blockage, because they believe that they're not meant to be heard, and that in fact to be heard, they have to fight for it. So once we clear something like that, there is the freed up consciousness at the conscious mind level to then create the new behavior from, oh my God, I actually have a choice here. What I thought I never had a choice, what I never even thought about, that there was anything other than this possibility I have to fight for to be heard. I have to learn how to make different choices, where I'm not investing tens of thousands of dollars in programs that are going to help me get heard, but instead I could just be heard. There's no fight. So as that whole paradigm collapses within a person's consciousness, they have to learn how to make it. So the second half of vibrational upgrade is the applied mindfulness, and helping them develop and give them like more clearings on courage and help cultivate their power to choose as they co-create their daily lives with the divine source. And that's the nature of our paradigm shift we're going through, from this old paradigm that's been crumbling since 2012, as we start to have the new one physicalizing, recognizing that there's not victimhood, there's not blame. And I'm going to say this as somebody who worked in politics in her first career. My master's is in politics, completely understanding. I've been on marches, the whole socioeconomic discussions and gender inequality. And despite that, I'm still saying it does not matter what background you come from. Using that completely genuine thing you can point to of your background that has kept you limited and unable to choose, let's say, more economic thriving, isn't helping you anymore. Whilst, yes, you can make new policies and legislate, what where your power is to shift your consciousness to come out of the, for example, poverty or survival mode, which I do with people too. So that coming out, and I feel like that's in part why we're seeing so much of the victimization as well as the divisiveness as well. So people who have already stepped into their empowerment and are working on themselves, and people are still in blame and name and blame victim mode game. And then we're also seeing marches in countries and protests in countries we've never seen before, because the misalignments, the abuse of power, is all of the secrets that have kept people unempowered are rising to the surface, so that we move into this new era in a much more heart-centered way. And whilst that sounds unbelievably idealistic, I ask, not you, Joseph, but listeners, look at yourself and how you react when you hear something with the proverbial air quotes, too good to be true. Because we are moving into a time where if we are all aware that we are connected to this great mystery of the divine, and we can make choices based from there rather than the more divisive, slicing apart life, rationalistic, labeling, judging, evaluating that the ego mind does, which we've been living with for centuries as the dominant valued force of being human and functioning well in society. And as we move into a more expansive consciousness and a more evolved consciousness, it is going to start showing up in that way. And we have been fielding the crumbling and the clearing of the earth and of institutions and like educational, financial, health care, and as well as within our own relationships, because something new is getting born. It's breaking through this shell that's been cracked. So the empowerment is where we're at now. Go, please.
No, just because I think I got this insight right now. The thing is really like we have, when we look at the body, and we have to recognize that this is all evolution, right? So it's like the situation is, if you imagine that you are only spirit and you chose, let's say, it's just a model of reality, right? You chose to live here. Well, then you have to choose to live in this kind of Neanderthaler ego, because it's like, it's not spiritual in many ways. When we get older, we get all this like fragmental views about ourselves, and you're heavily into holistic, so I understand. But the point is, I think that is the case, evolution is probably that we become more like oriented towards our real identity, to our spirituality. And that means choices. That means freedom. That means tree of life. That means, things come to us. But, the main thing I wanted to say is there's this beautiful story in India, and it's a metaphor, and it speaks about the two birds, best friends. The two birds, the best friends. One is the universal self, and the other one is the individual soul. And it makes a point, because it says, in one paragraph, it says, those two birds, they sit on the same self tree. Of course, they're just you, right? So one is the universal self, and I can talk with you about it because you're an expert in Indian philosophy as well. And, so you probably know it. But what is interesting to me, the other one is then the one who eats from the tree.
Yeah.
And is full of wisdom, and that's the sorry state of mind it is in. But they ultimately is just one personality. But it's really like us. Like, not everyone has that universal self that is actually us, and then we have this uniqueness because we are born in different places and we have different choices in our what we want as experiences. And so now we have that also, and that's like actually just one. And the more the universal self, I think, not so identified with our person, right, with the personhood, the more it becomes like manifest in this body, in all humanity, in the future, hopefully. I don't know. I don't think much about it. I think more about, how my situation is, not like egoistic in a way, but, I have to first like know it from the inside out. And so, I think that is the main challenge, to let the witness in, which is you. Let the witness in, let it witness the whole thing. Let the observer in, let it observe it, because that is the only thing for me which can actually liberate the what do you say, the energies, right? A little bit, because when you just witness it and when you're just like aware of a universal higher self, which you are, then I think, the egoic mind becomes more quiet. But then it's just my experience. But I would like to ask you before, because we are coming late now, right? We have 5 more minutes, I think. According to your time schedule, maybe a little bit longer. So can I just ask you another question?
You sure can, please.
Okay, so let's talk about your extensive Buddhist, Taoist, and yoga studies in Asia, because it's what you have next to your PhD. And finally, your books. You have written several books. So if you can still wrap it up a little bit, and then how people can get in contact with you.
Okay, so what you just said, I before I do that, I want to respond because I love it. Mm-hmm. Observer is more commonly understood in the lingo nowadays. People have like COVID, even before. So another way, I could go in so many different directions, as you're hearing and seeing and witnessing right now in me. Even before COVID, there were more yoga studios and more meditation apps. I'm on a couple of them, in fact. And that's because this 20-year, 2012 to 2032 major evolutionary window is also called humanity's spiritual awakening. And so what I was also seeing with the people coming in to my business and who I was serving, like around 2014, they were talking about a lot more tinnitus. And around that time, 2015, 2016, people were coming in asking for help with how can I stop dealing with all the negativity around me? I feel it all around me. And then other people, skin allergies, other people wanting to eat, as education has increased out there about the food supply, particularly in America, people are eating cleaner. So all of this is a sign of opening and awakening and becoming more aligned. Even the skin sensitivities, like no longer using chemicals that would cause the skin to break out when you're washing your clothes. That didn't happen a decade before because the backdrop of what we were living in was still much more Newtonian physics based, much more solid. Whereas this new era is much more, if you want to construe it this way, quantum physics based, where it's much more energy based, vibrationally based, sensitive, awakened, spiritual awakening.
Yeah, in fact, Jota, to interrupt you quickly now, in fact, it really comes together now with the East.
Yes.
Our Western understanding of vibration and frequency and all this.
Yeah. And I feel like that's, God bless the divine. I always, like, even yesterday, I was working with one of my vibrational upgrade practitioners in one of her one-on-ones. And even she needed the reminder of how, and she was so grateful for the reminders of how the ego mind, when we're strategizing a quote unquote solution to get what we want, for if we have a goal, that ego mind of ours is myopic and only knows what it knows. It doesn't bring in the new. The ego mind is not how we access new possibilities opening up in our lives to go beyond what we've already done. It's through connecting with the mystery, connecting with the heart and the higher self, that because it's an all-seeing universe. So why would we use a smaller tool when we're going for something that can access bigger and newer? So deferring to the higher self, or that includes the observer, and is the way to go now, because that's how we bring in the new. And so part of what's also happening is everything is coming into rebalancing, like the divine feminine with the divine masculine, not genders only, but within each of us, where yang or masculine is the active and yin is more the internal world. So we listen to our intuition, we get guidance, and then we take a step out in our lives. So there's that dance, instead of everything being intellectual or action oriented, all yang, or everything being passive and dreamy and no action, all yin. And what is also coming into balance is the material and the spiritual. I'm saying this based on what you just said. It was a great catalyst, because the spiritual and material means that coming into rebalancing is what we're talking about now, learning how to actually house the spirit while flourishing in the material, because historically it's, it's,
well said.
If I'm going to be close to God, I need to be broke, poor, minimalistic. And so, or if I'm going to be materialistic, then I'm going to be greedy and a bad person and egoic. But they're coming into balance now. So I find that another aspect of what's going on is my background. My first career was in politics and in protecting the environment. And you said this, and you're not the only one, and you're not wishful thinking. You used a different term, like maybe it's just me being hopeful. My whole mission, Joseph, is when I stepped out with my master's degree after a successful political career in getting people elected to both the California State Assembly and the federal level, who were not only going to say yes, vote yes on environmentally protective legislation, but they were going to write it. So, for example, I helped get the first Latina woman elected to the California State Assembly who wrote legislation to save the last bit of green space in LA Basin, which is huge. So when I stepped out and started going for employment, because I had been asking the question, where do I have more effect on changing for the better? Is it within the system, working like within a federal or a local governmental environmental protection agency, or outside the system, like with an NGO, like I already had, or nonprofit? And I know, that feeling when no doors are opening and you're just kind of wondering what's going on here. This isn't easy.
Yes, sure. That's you feel kind of stuck, right?
Yes, what?
You feel kind of stuck.
Yeah.
When you have that feeling.
That's what was happening.
You can't really go. Yeah. Mm.
You can't really, what?
Grow.
Oh, yeah. So, I knew.
Like grow in the direction.
Oh, go.
You want to grow,
Yeah, exactly.
Grow.
You're blocked. You can't.
Yeah, I talk like Arnold. Yeah, I talk like Arnold Schwarzenegger a little bit, but that would be an insult to him. But I'm Austrian, and sometimes it comes out that way. But I really would like.
Let me just finish that. Hold on, please, because it's really important. Because
yes, please go ahead.
And I have a German client, by the way, a long-term mastermind who's a vibrational upgrade practitioner, and so I'm used to the accent. It's okay. So, but you're right on. You can't go. So I knew to step back and say, okay, what am I being shown here? And what I got was it's not ready to change. The investment in fossil fuel, this is in the late 90s. It's not ready to change. So, okay, I asked my guidance. What do I do now? Okay, if you want change, go for one consciousness at a time. So I deferred back to my bachelor's, which ultimately was in English literature, and went to teach in the classroom while running energy medicine sessions and holistic health and wellness sessions on the side, as well as teaching meditation to both students and adults, working with consciousness that as each consciousness evolves and lightens, it helps the collective evolve and get higher. And that will ultimately reflect in our behavior towards the earth, which is happening now. So it's not just hopeful thinking that you said. I feel like as each of us, you use your own words. It's behind the premise behind what I'm doing and why I'm doing it is that
recognition. Is that recognition that it is best improvements in this world is best achieved by working one consciousness at a time,
and that's where our power is. Like as the consciousness evolves, but it's also with the vibrational backdrop we're in now. It used to be 10,000. I talk about this in my third book. It used to be 10,000 other people's hearts get lighter and more awakened if one of us who has been on the path for a while really awakens our heart, and that power emanates from our heart because we're all connected in the underlying matrix of it all. And so nowadays it's with one of us awakening our heart's power and moving beyond the egoic mind living, as we've been talking about in our lovely conversation today. Now it frees up 100,000 other people. So it's also the 100th monkey theory, how there were monkeys on one island who started to peel they had never peeled bananas. Historically, it was studied. This is a scientific study, the 100th monkey theory. And so on one island, monkeys started to realize they could peel the bananas, and then it hit collectively on where they had no communication on islands around the world. Monkeys started to peel bananas. So there's a collective connection, right, at the collective unconscious level.
I think I got that point myself, when I started doing it.
Yeah. Do you mean peeling bananas, or do you mean your own work with consciousness?
No, I'm peeling bananas. I started peeling bananas before I ate them. To help the skin.
Skin's awful.
And that happened in Austria. There's no jungle and no apes. I was the only one probably. But, it's so interesting. Really, I really want you to talk about this, how people can, get your books. What are the names? Actually, they will be in the show notes, of course. I have them all listed. But you wrote several very interesting books. Particularly if you can tell us a little bit about that one, which is the dragons.
Oh,
and it's about the potential field. And then you had a wonderful expression, which I never heard before. What is the whole title of that book? Just a second. You could tell us.
So my last, so I've written 4, and I've been a contributing author of other ones, but the 4 main ones I've written that have all gone on to be international number 1 bestsellers, except my very first one. The second So the third book and the 4th book have dragon in the title. So the third book, I think, is the one you're talking about, and that's reason. And this is the only one on audible.com. And people love it. They work with it even when they're working with me and receiving loads of recordings of our events where I'm doing clearings and activations on their consciousness. They still go listen to Reasonable Dragons on Audible. It's phenomenal to me. It surprises me, as you can hear in my voice. So anyway, Reasonable Dragons. And then the subtitle is How to Activate the Field of Unlimited Possibilities, where logical magic is the new normal. That's what I saw.
I never heard it before. Logical magic.
Yeah.
I think the logic is so important to relate it to the consciousness. I mean, because to the self, actually, to the universal self, then it's really, for me, in my experience, it's just more logical. And I love that also with the magic, because, I'm a big fan of Hinduism, Buddhism and all this, really. But Hinduism is very, very, very good, actually, with all the negative aspects sometimes in history, right? Caste system and all this. I'm not talking about this. But, that whole thing about magic, like in India, they call it Maya. And even there are some people, philosophers like Alan Watts, they analyzed this, they researched it, and they actually found out that, also Alan Watts mentioned it, that there's this relationship between Maya and magic, but also that matter and mother, these words are all related to Maya in a way. And, it makes sense to me. I mean, it doesn't matter. But the main thing, what really matters, what really matters is that you can accept the fact that we might be living in a real illusion, and it's all good for our spirit, which is beyond that real illusion. Anyway, I'm talking too much here about this.
All right, so the 4th book, the other one with the dragon title, my most recent one published this year, it's called The Dragon Master Creatrix, and I don't remember the subtitle right now. Conversations
Master Creatrix.
Yeah, Dragon Master Creatrix. Conversations with a female spiritual teacher for these new times. So that's the subtitle. And it's really fun for me because it's my first not entirely nonfiction book. Each chapter is started out modeled around one of my students traveling internationally to meet me to get trained in vibration upgrade system and get attuned and taken to sacred spots and sacred sites and stone circles. And each chapter is her narrating what she experiences in these different places and at these different events and interacting with the others on the retreats. I do these twice a year, in October, Samhain time, and in May, Beltane time. So the 2 most important dates on the Celtic calendar. And so then each chapter goes into me. I was a little on edge when I was writing it because I was bringing out what has always been contained within my mastermind program and taught only to the people in my mastermind program becoming vibration upgrade practitioners or up-leveling to the next level. And so these are questions that they have asked me and actual answers I have given them I spent so much time and paid so much to get somebody to go through and bring out the questions and answers through all the years of interacting with them. And that's what's in the second half of each chapter. So it has a bit of that yogic teacher kind of question and answer, like Osho was known for at the second, and even Paramahansa in the second half of each chapter.
The Upanishads, like this, the Upanishads.
Yeah.
The Upanishads, like, they are all about this master, and actually it means sitting at the feet of a master and questions, right?
Well, that's, what I think part of it triggered me is one of my masterminders who became a vibrational upgrade practitioner, she wrote something about me, and she said, working with Dr. Allison really is like sitting at the feet of a master. And even when I say that now, it's so humbling and honoring and beautiful. And so I was like, okay. I was also aware too that there is a part of this tradition that is underserved by the feminine, and the difficulty that a woman has as a female spiritual teacher compared to how easily men step into that role. The authority is so much more assumed naturally, unconsciously for men than women. And so we're either supposed to be nurturing or we're supposed to be fiery. And so that's why that subtitle is what it is: Conversations with a Female Spiritual Teacher for These New Times, and why I presented it the way I did. So the questions, though, like, they're not just the kind of mystical questions or about energy and energy flows and how to work with it, or the sacred spots. It's also like, how do I stop caring about what other people think of me? And how do I move forward and make choices that I know my spouse and my loved ones aren't going to necessarily like? Like, they're very practical while on the spiritual path questions and answers, so that people can be true to themselves and step into more of their power. So that's the fourth book, The Dragon Master Creatrix. All of them are on Amazon. My name is Allison with one L, then J middle initial, and then Kay. You have to have the J, my middle initial, because there's another Allison K on Amazon, and she doesn't write about what I write about. So I'm also... And
you have a website?
Yeah, vibrationalupgrade.com. And then on Facebook,
vibrationalupdate.com.
Yeah.
So actually, I can put this in the show notes. That's where probably also all the events and programs are, right? So Vibrational
Upgrade. And then Vibrational Upgrade is also the name of my free group on Facebook. And there's over 4,000 people in there, and I'm in there daily, except on the weekends. And so it's a really great community of really high vibe people. All of my masterminders are in there, my vibrational upgrade practitioners, and then loads of people from all over the world. And it's just a really sweet community where I'm giving support and elevation every day. And that's also where you can see my latest offerings and how to work with me. You can get that on my website too. But
yeah, I see it now. I have it in front of me. I looked for information about you on all kinds of places, but now I have it here. That's good. It's good if I didn't know so much, because the flow of the conversation is actually better. I learned sometimes in the beginning when I did my first episodes, I would prepare up to 8 hours,
Oh my God.
And then I knew so much I couldn't listen anymore.
I bet. Yeah, it's funny. Everybody has a different way of preparing. I've been with people who do it the way that you just described. I did an interview with a fellow yesterday in Australia, and it was really interesting because there was little to nothing known. And then there's people who listen to me on other interviews, and they come prepared with lists of questions and like really pull out of me like the teacher. Like they just use me in the interview for their own growth, which is smart too. So yeah, I have really enjoyed being on all of these different podcasts around the world. I've been doing interviews since I came back from Asia, starting I think around 2011. Maybe even the first year. There's like a video of me at a book release party. Anyway, it's just been especially interesting during COVID to be able to be connected with people all over the world and assess and hear how people are faring during this time and the way that they're framing it and reframing it from a more mountaintop perspective, so to give people comfort and alleviate that focus on survival and fear, because there really is
media.
So much fear on the planet.
Focus on media, particularly also because, I live here in my work in a very small mountain village, and there is not much talk about it, honestly speaking. And I don't look at the media much either about it anymore. So I'm almost not affected by it, fortunately. But I know when I look at Austria, at my family, you have this every day on television. So that was a beautiful talk. We have to meet again because I want to, I want to invite you again because it's just not enough time to talk with somebody who has been extensively traveling in Asia and knows, about all this Buddhist meditation, Taoist, and yoga, and all this. It will be wonderful. If you agree, I will send you an email, and we are going to, not right away, but maybe in a few months, that would be great, to have another interview.
Yes.
So fantastic. Thank you very much. Alison, thank you very much for being on the show.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, Joseph, having a conversation with you as you're tucked away in a mountain village on an island off of Spain.
It's the only Austrian,
I bet.
It's funny. In my divinity master's degree, they always called me the resident Buddhist. I was never anything really. But I still have to agree sometimes. I just tend very much to the Buddhist philosophy. So thank you, Alison. It was really a pleasure and a learning experience with you. And thank you, my dear listeners, for joining us today. The recap of the show with bullet points are in the show notes and all the links mentioned during the interview on ombythebeach.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe to have you here again for our next episode. This is your host, Joseph Schinwald. Thank you. And goodbye until we meet again.
Namaste.